Nothing. First there was an issue. No, no. I'm sorry.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, Natalie.
I tried to start my video, but it said that you had stopped it. Do you want me to start it though?
Oh, okay. Hang on 1 second. Sorry about that.
No problem.
You should be able to try it now. See if that works.
And yeah, I've never had that. That's a new one.
So I'm not hearing you because
Oh.
Nope, that's my fault.
Oh, okay.
Hi. My name's Karen. I'm helping out Anderson's tonight. I'm going to be hosting for you. Still waiting on Margarita, and then will Dory be? Do you know if Dory will be in attendance this evening?
I don't think so. She hasn't said she will be. Usually she lets me know. So
Okay.
Margarita and I have done this before, so we'll just
awesome.
wing it. Do you want us to do about half an hour of chatting and then Q&A? Sometimes there's no questions, sometimes there are. So are you going to look at the chat box for us and let us know?
So that's what I wanted to know is how would you guys like me to feed you the questions, or do you want to pull the questions yourself?
Yeah, no, I would love it if you could feed us so that because if there isn't any, we can keep talking and then you can kind of appear if there are, and you can say, oh, we have some questions, and then we'll stop and you can say someone wants to know this, and
Okay, so yeah, so let's plan for that. Hang on. Yeah, so let's plan for that. So let's do like half an hour of you guys chatting, and then at that mark, if there's any questions, I'll come back in. I'll start giving you some questions, and then we'll kind of see where the conversation goes from there.
Margarita, I
Hi,
love your long hair. Oh, we can't hear you.
Oh.
We can't. Sorry. There we go. Yeah, now we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, by default. So.
So yes, so we were just saying that we're going to talk. You and I will just chat for like half an hour, and then if there's questions, Karen will pop in and feed them to us so that you and I don't have to look at the chat box.
Yeah,
which
you guys won't have to worry.
at my advanced stage, like I can't see anything.
That's greatly appreciated. Like, I mean, I'm fine. Just it's more the multitasking that like I get so caught up in conversation that if I like keep track of chats too, sometimes it gets like a little bit much. So I appreciate that. And oh my God, Natalie, you're so sweet to like have my books in the background along with your books. They look so wonderful together. I love it.
Yeah, there's a bit of a continuum of color going on. I just noticed that actually.
Yeah,
from the violet to the blue, and then to the red kind of. Yeah.
I feel like our books would be best friends, even though they're in different eras.
Yeah.
So at 7 o'clock, I'll admit whoever's here, and then I've just got a little spiel I have to give. I'll introduce you guys, and then after I do that, I'm just going to turn my video and sound off, let you guys talk for about half an hour. Come on, I'll start feeding questions, and then we'll kind of, like I was telling Natalie, we'll see where the rest of the event goes from there.
Yeah, and I'm okay finishing anywhere between 7:30 and 8. In other words, I'm not fussed if and nothing's going on and it's 7:40. You know, I don't care. It's, you know, I always think I find like half an hour is a good block, and then after that people will stay, but as you get closer to the next hour, you know, people have other things to do. So
yeah,
understandable. Yeah,
I've noticed like with all the book club meetings and these types of events that like usually I would say like 40 to 45 minutes is the sweet spot.
Yes.
Unless you just get like really inquisitive people, which happens once in a while, but I'm here for as long as you guys need me. Okay. I apologize ahead of time. We have a delivery, unfortunately, scheduled probably for like right the second we start. So if there is a dog barking in the background, I'm as far away and with all the doors closed as possible, but there might be a little bit of yipping. And so fingers crossed, my husband gets to the front door before she notices.
My husband is basically in our like underground like bunker with our dogs. Like that's where whenever I'm about to start an event, I'm like, get yourself your whiskey and get out of here and take those dogs with you. And do not. And actually he showed up at one of my events, and it was an event where when everyone first logged on, you could see everybody. Mm-hmm. And then I see my husband, like,
oh my gosh.
Like, and you could see his name on the bottom, right? I'm like, oh, and I'm texting him like, whoa, I'm like, get off the screen. I was so terrified that he was going to do something. Like, I was like, oh no.
That's kind of sweet though.
Yeah, no, I'm sure Terry's the same way, Margarita. He's definitely my number one fan. Yeah. I don't know if you can do this otherwise. Honestly, I think you have to have someone in your life that
believes in you more than you believe in yourself.
Exactly. Thanks for the beat. Exactly. Yeah.
Very awesome. I had to lock my cats out because my one will just be wandering around everywhere. So I was like, no, we're not going to do it that.
And are you broadcasting from the bookstore? Or
no, this is from my home, from my bedroom. Actually. Yeah.
Pretty nice show.
Yeah. My husband actually works for the bookstore, and I've helped them out with some events in the past, and so they were kind of the person who was supposed to do this got sick, and so they were like scrambling, and I said I can definitely step in. So this is actually my first time hosting, so I hope everything goes smoothly, and I will do the best I can for you ladies. So
thank goodness.
Oh, hilarious.
Can you hear the barking? Phew.
We always try and argue that it's, you know, security, except whenever the gentlemen come in to look at the water meter or the gas meter or whatever, and their heads, or fix the pool, their heads will be walking right by the kitchen window. The dogs are like, they don't do anything. You know, it's like the least scary people at the front, they freak out about. So
my husband came in through the backyard, through like our kitchen door the other day. I was like paralyzed with terror.
Yeah.
And the dog was sleeping next to me. Like she should have been barking her head off, that like literally like somebody came in through a door, and instead she's like sleepy, like what's happening? And I'm like, hello.
Don't rely on that.
Like, this is how you greet potential burglars, with like sleepy yawns and hello. Like, okay, you guys are gonna be ready to, you know,
we got a security system. Okay, let's put this on.
Just a few minutes, and then we'll let everybody in. Looks like
So Margarita, I have to tell you, when I saw your launch on your Instagram.
Sorry, I'm just fixing my light. Yes.
No problem. When I saw your launch on your Instagram today, was it where you listed your events? And the first one was Powerhouse Arena, and I went, oh my God, Margarita's filling stadiums. The first thing I thought, and I was like, oh my God, I can't even fill like a little tiny Zealand. Margarita's filling stadiums. And
Madison Square Garden, yes. Like
Powerhouse Arena. Like I live in Canada, by the way, Karen. Like I know, like I don't know like a lot of necessarily things that normal people would know in America. So.
No, it's all good. I wasn't familiar. They weren't around when I lived in Brooklyn. And they hosted my Una launch, and like just were so fantastic. It's such a cool venue because the bookstore is downstairs, and then they have this like loft. It's like a loft, and they have a lofted space with just a bar and seats and like kind of a stage curtain area. It's so beautiful, and it's right by the Brooklyn Bridge. So like the views like all around are fantastic. So
great.
So we were really, really happy when they said they were thrilled to host us again. I know they sold a lot of books, and so like for me, that's what.
No, it's wonderful.
I try to tell everybody, like, get the book there, please.
Yeah.
So that I can be invited back for the next one, hopefully.
Is this your first time doing stuff with Andersons, or?
So I was in conversation with our other friend, Stephanie Roble, who had an event in February when her second book, This Might Hurt, launched.
Awesome.
And then, and then Margarita, how about you? Have you done an event?
I think this might be my first. I know I have, I have one in June, but no, that's a different bookstore. I think that's Warwick's.
I think when we suggested you to them, that I felt like they were very excited. I felt like they didn't say, oh, we've seen her before. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like this, I feel like it's,
Oh,
Are you working on your third right now? I keep meaning to ask you.
I'm tinkering with like a bunch of different ideas. So it's like, it's kind of what was happening before Violet, where I started writing like 6 or 7 different books. And I freaked out about it that time, and this time I'm just like embracing the chaos, like something is gonna stick. And I've had this one concept that I've been holding on to for years, and I feel like if I don't develop it now, somebody else will. Like, you know, ideas will just, they'll hang around for only so long before they kind of flit away like a butterfly to another writer. And I feel like this might be my last chance. And I have a great title that, like, part of it is because I love the title so much that
that's not insignificant when it comes to writing a book.
Hard. So I'm hoping that I can like really kind of sink my teeth into that one. And one of my questions to you is going to be actually the same thing, so don't answer yet.
I won't. Save it.
Freshly about it.
Okay. It's 8 o'clock for us.
I'm going to start letting people in, and then we'll go from there.
And then do you post the recording after?
Yes, I'm sure they do. I'm not sure. Ginny will take care of all of that.
Gotcha.
All right. Okay, hello everybody. So far we've got a few people in attendance and I'll keep an eye out for anybody else that joins. Good evening, my name is Karen. I'm with Anderson's Bookshops. We'd like to take a moment to thank you for being with us tonight. We are grateful for your support. For those of you not familiar with us, Anderson's is an independent bookstore outside of Chicago. We've been owned and run by the Anderson family for 6 generations now, making us the oldest single family run bookseller in the country. And we are now proudly 100% women owned as well. We are pleased to offer both virtual and in-person events, so please visit our website or social media pages to learn more about our upcoming events, including Catherine McGee, Michael Lealy, Noodle the dog, and David Sedaris. A quick accessibility note, we have turned on the live transcript feature, so if you'd like subtitles or full transcript as provided by Zoom, you can choose that using the live transcript or CC button at the bottom of your own screen. So tonight, for the big events, tonight we are thrilled to celebrate the release of Bloomsbury Girls. Please welcome the author, the fabulous Natalie Jenner, the internationally best-selling author of the Jane Austen Society and now Bloomsbury Girls. A USA Today and #1 national bestseller, the Jane Austen Society was named one of the best books of 2020 by Goodreads and has been sold for translation in 21 countries. That's amazing. Bloomsbury Girls released this May and is a June Indie Next Pick and People Magazine Book of the Week. Born in England and raised in Canada, Natalie has been a corporate lawyer, career coach, and most recently, an independent bookstore owner in Oakville, Ontario, where she lives with her family and 2 rescue dogs. So today she will be in conversation with Margarita Montimore, the author of Asleep from Day and Una Out of Order, which was a USA Today bestseller and Good Morning America Book Club pick. After receiving a BFA in creative writing from Emerson College, Margarita worked for over a decade in publishing and social media before deciding to focus on the writing dream full-time. Born in Soviet Ukraine and raised in Brooklyn, she currently lives in New Jersey with her husband and dog. Her next book, Acts of Violet, releases on July 5th. Welcome to you both, and thank you for being with us.
Thanks so much. Margarita, can we make this more interesting than Noodle the dog?
I don't know. I feel like that's a high bar. And literally the first thing I'm going to do after this chat is like go down a whole rabbit hole of who Noodles is and why we all need to know about him. Yeah. So yeah, we've got our work cut out for us, but I think we can do it. So Bloomsbury Girls, first of all, I love this book, and it's such a pleasure to kind of find a book that is just like, it's entertaining and comforting it on a purely like, it was a beautiful spring week that I spent the majority of just like outside laying out and just reading this book. And I felt like I was on vacation reading this book. And at the same time, there are just really like wonderful kind of social and feminist issues and societal issues. There's all of this heart and depth to the book as well. And to start, would you like to give a quick summary of your book? Would you like me to give a quick rundown? I have an elevator pitch memorized. So,
wonderful. Yeah. So no, I would say that Bloomsbury Girls is about 3 very disaffected female bookshop employees in 1950s London, in the Bloomsbury district of London, who are in a constant battle of the sexes with the 6 male managers and department heads, because this is a 4-floor bookshop with many different departments. And they decide to make things change for the second half of the 20th century and band together and find a way to take over the bookshop. So I tend to call it Mad Men meets You've Got Mail. And I threw everything but the kitchen sink into this book because when I write, I was listening to The Office ladies. You know how I only found The Office like a year ago? And now I'm like one of the crazy fans. So of course I'm listening to The Office ladies book that just came out. And one of the actresses was quoting one of her teachers at university had said, that you give pleasure when you write with pleasure. And I think you're the same way. And I think that when you are having fun and joy with writing, doesn't mean it's not hard, but when you're having joy with writing, you feel very free. And I think when you feel free, you feel open to whatever makes sense. And so I wasn't thinking strategically that I would put in those themes that you mentioned, but they felt very real and germane as I wrote. So I just went with it and had so much fun. I have never had more fun in my life than when I was writing this book.
That's so great to hear. And that joy really comes across the page too. I think you're absolutely right that when you write with pleasure, it's absolutely, that passion always will come through on the page. And one more comp or inspiration that you mentioned in your acknowledgements that I was so thrilled to see, because not a lot of people really talk about this hidden gem, 84 Charing Cross Road. I haven't read the book. I obviously need to, but I remember like stumbling across this movie, I think either when I was in college or right after. And like, first of all, I mean, it's Anthony Hopkins and it's so good.
And
oh
Bancroft.
Anne Bancroft. I knew it was Anne. I couldn't think of her last name first. Like two phenomenal actors, and it's just such a touching story. He's the British bookstore owner, and she's in America, right? And
and like Judi Dench is in a side role as his wife, right? Which is hilarious. One of the really great things that people don't always know about this movie, which is one of my favorite movies, is that Mel Brooks, who was married to Anne Bancroft for many years, and their son Max is a really successful writer and involved with film as well. Mel Brooks actually bought the rights to the novel and gave it to Anne as like an anniversary present.
Oh my God.
And they made it into a stage play, which is just the most romantic thing,
that
right?
Is super romantic.
And so romantic. My husband is like, I'm always like, you could give me this, like, buy me a play. But they turned it into I think a play first, and I think she performed in the play. But with the movie, what happened, Margarita, and this is really interesting, was you and I both debuted in the first wave of the pandemic with our first books. And we've really bonded, and we've become quite close, and we connect regularly and support each other. And it is one of the thrills for me is having my second book come out at the same time as some of my favorite authors. This has been like a really fun month for me because I'm so excited for my friends' books. And Acts of Violet, which is right there, which is Margarita's next book. I have to tell you, I remember everything from that book because I have a visual memory. So if I see something, I don't forget it. And because your book is such a compilation of different things, like podcasts and a newspaper article and like it's got lots of different content, which is so inventive and fascinating. But I was thinking of all the books I've read this year, I think yours is the one that I just remember everything that happened, which is with my middle-aged brain is saying something. So it's so dazzlingly inventive and original, and I'm so excited for you. But back to this for a quick second. In the first wave of the pandemic, I'm sitting at home and I'm really missing bookshops because bookshops in Canada were closed, and I never got to see my book when it released on a bookshop shelf for like a year. And as a present for my publicist, Dory, I gave her a first American edition of 84 Charing Cross Road, and I had it on my brain. It's now on Netflix, everyone, so please go watch it. But at the time it wasn't, but I had the DVD. So after I was gifting her the book, I was like, I should watch that movie. And I watched the movie, and it's about the manager of the bookshop and a woman writer in real life. It's a collection of letters that actually were passed between them, who's trying to get rare books from England. And it's a really lovely epistolary friendship memoir of sorts. But in the movie, it was so like visceral to me, the setting of the bookshop. And there was this glassed in office at the back where you could see everything. And there was these different floors, and there was all these side characters that no one really knew. There was sort of like a working mom, and there was a young single woman. No one, like, you didn't really know much about them. And I remember as I was watching the movie, and I was thinking about writing another book following Evie from the Jane Austen Society, but I wanted to be a standalone, a brand new book. And I remember I'm watching this movie and I'm like, oh gosh, there's a whole other movie in there with all those people in the background in this bookstore. And then that's how like the spark of the idea. So this movie is actually, this is probably like, the biggest reason the book exists.
And that's such a writerly way to think too, of kind of like the story behind the story of like, it's such a, like, just like when you go to a restaurant or a store and you see a person or a couple and you just like start to create a story for them. And for you to do that with background characters of a film, like I love that so much. And I thank you for all of your kind words about Acts of Violet. I was actually going to say, you know, in terms of innovative format, one of the things that I loved about Bloomsbury Girls is, so this bookshop has, is it 43 rules?
No, 51, because it got to fit the manager, the uptight manager has 50 rules and he's going to keep going. And I love it was 51. I stopped at 51. I'm like, why did I stop there? I went, oh yeah, somebody in the store said, that's enough. Like you're not doing another 50, right? So
I think the books, I thought we see all of the rules. I guess we don't see some. So
yeah, I couldn't do 51 chapters.
One of the things that I loved is that in every chapter you see one of the rules, and then you see subsequently how it is transgressed and, you know, completely subverted. And I'm so curious how you came, like, kind of which came first, the rules, the chapters, were you writing them in tandem? And did you write out all 51?
No, so yeah, well, I did, but I'll tell you what happened. The movie came first because the movie had the glassed office, and the glassed office was, who would want a glassed office at the back of a bookstore? Because if anyone's been in modern bookstores, the back office is hidden, like you don't see in there. Because I have had a bookshop, the back office, you don't know what your customers are looking there. Like it's, you know, it's just a mess of towers of books everywhere. And so this guy is obviously fastidious and neat. He's got this glass office in the movie, and I'm like, what kind of man or manager of any kind would want to be able to see everything that was going on? And then I was like, oh, he really wants to know and be in control as much as possible of his environment. And then when I was writing the book, it came to me again. One of the characters was just like, oh God, don't forget rule number whatever, we can't do that. And I just was like writing the book for a while that way. And then I became more strategic or intentional in the sense that I would realize that I was making up a rule in the context of the chapter that I could then show its unraveling or its undoing. And there was humor in that. So then I give my draft to my, you know, agent, and we work through several drafts. And then I give what's probably my fourth draft to my editor. And he came back with, you know, some comments and things he'd like to see more of. And he said, you know what, it would be really cool as if we preceded the beginning of each chapter with a rule. So then I had to create the 51 rules, see which chapters, what rule I could make up for certain chapters where there was no formulated rule yet. And I had to make sure I got them all right. And then they had to be in some kind of order. So then I had to rearrange their order with their numbers, and it's a Word doc from heck. Like it's an interesting Word doc. But that was the process. And that just goes to show you, I think, Margarita, how much we benefit from having a team as writers, and that for so many years as a writer, you spend your time on your own. And this is, I mean, I just finished the first draft of was essentially my 9th book and 2 published. And I think I was floundering a lot because it was a very solitary pursuit for me. It was something I did early in the morning from 5 to 7 before my daughter went to school, and I had my other job. And it wasn't something that I got a lot of input on. And I am so insanely grateful for the input of both my agent and my editor. And Margarita, I know with Acts of Violet, like I know that your editor was, you know, very actively involved as well. And isn't that one of the great joys? Because otherwise it is a very solitary job.
I think it's not only a joy to have the kind of collaborative energy, but it's when you find somebody who understands your creative wavelength and actually like helps you bring your vision to light. And you know, because with Una Out of Order, that book got rejected, like I kid you not, like by over 300 agents, I think. And I had people like, make it more YA, make it more romance, make it more this. And with, you know, Flatiron Books, it's been just such a joy. And yeah, Carolyn, she just had this almost like sixth sense about what my intention was with the book. And like the brainstorming sessions I had with her were just, I would leave these conversations, like you said, like with just so much excitement and energy. And, and this is when we were still very much, housebound, and, we both wrote our books during lockdown. So I think, having that outlet, like to bring us that joy and that escape, and something that we knew, like, not only do we have so much pleasure getting lost in it, but then we're going to get to share this, and hopefully that will come across. And so I totally understand that, kind of not feeling like you're on an island. It's definitely, it's so important. But so I'm glad to know kind of what the process was with the rules. That's very interesting. And I think having each rule begin a chapter, like, it's such a great way, because at the end of every chapter, I really was like, what's the next rule? What's the next rule? Very excited just to see, because some of the rules, like in some ways it's subtle, in some ways, like it is just, they just trample the rule completely. And another treat, I think, for readers, especially those who've read the Jane Austen Society, which is like so many people, because that book did so phenomenally well, and rightfully so. But I was thrilled to see Evie again, and really just for her to have the spotlight. And especially, she's such a quiet character, and she has just this very quiet dignity, and the way that she is given this kind of room for her to have her moments, and for her to develop. And she's so sympathetic. I mean, I was rooting for all three of the women, but having already known her from Jane Austen Society and seeing her journey. So I'm curious, you said that when was it during the process of Jane Austen Society that you decided, okay, we're gonna see Evie again, and I'm gonna make sure, like, she has a lot more screen time?
The week after the Jane Austen Society became an international bestseller.
Really?
Yeah. So literally it was like late May of 2020, and the Jane Austen Society is doing, very well under the circumstances, with the jet fuel of Jane Austen behind it. I was so fortunate as they debut to have my book reach readers, and also the incredible hand selling that bookstore owners and bookstore staff had to do with the shops closed. And I think my editor was saying to my agent, like, what does she have? Like, does she have anything else, up the sleeve kind of thing? And I said to my agent, I've been thinking about Evie as the youngest character in the Jane Austen Society. There's 8 characters, 4 men and 4 women. She's the youngest. She's the one with the most unsettled life ahead of her. I was missing my characters, Margarita, because in the month of May, I was doing heavy promotion for the Jane Austen Society. And you know what it's like, you're constantly talking about your characters who you haven't necessarily really engaged with since copy editing, it's been a while. And I was missing them so much. And what was great was when I started to write the book, I did not know who was going to pop in for cameo appearances from the Jane Austen Society. Just like the reader wouldn't know, I didn't know either. And
really?
Then whenever they would show up, I mean, in the prologue, which is what I wrote and submitted and was acquired by St. Martin's, so the first 7 pages was what they bought in an outline, a synopsis, I guess, that I do mention Mimi, for example. And so I kind of knew that Mimi being an actress who has spent time on the stage in London, I kind of knew it was going to make sense for her to show up in this book. And but I didn't know of the other character that shows up. And when he shows up, I was just like, my heart leapt. I was like, oh my God, you're back. I was so happy. And he does something on the first page of the chapter that he shows up in, where he does this like cackle laugh, and he's like, oh, you nicknamed the stairway, how charming. And I was just like, oh, I almost cried. He felt so real to me in that moment. And you know what it's like, it's just the most intoxicating feeling, right? And so it's Evie is also, interestingly, my mother had to leave school when she was 14, which is the age that Evie has to in the Jane Austen Society leave school. But I didn't put that together until after I'd finished the book. But also my daughter was 16 when I wrote the Jane Austen Society, which was exactly 4 years ago. And that's the age of Evie when the Jane Austen Society ends. So then when I pick up the Jane Austen, when I pick up writing Bloomsbury Girls, It's actually coming out at a time when my daughter is 20, the exact age of Evie in Bloomsbury Girls. And what's really fascinating is Evie is an amalgam of my mother, me, and my daughter. She's like 3 generations of like these Jenner women. But that said, we're all extroverts, like we're all hammy and talky. And what I love about Evie, what you were saying as well, is I think we underestimate certain traits in society. Certain traits get really valued, right? And naturally charisma and charm and extroversion lends itself to that, is just getting to know someone fast. That, you know, but there's value in all the different ways that we are. And I really love with Evie seeing the value in the way that she is. And how it's giving her, how the qualities that she has fostered on her own and being authentic and true to herself about is going to and is giving her a happy life. And I love that.
That's what it is that has like drew me so much to her in particular, because, you know, even though I straddle the fence between extrovert and introvert, like I can be in social situations, be fine, but, you know, given the choice, I think many writers, I won't say most, but many lean towards, because it's a solitary activity. So for me, whenever I see introverts that get to really shine, and that, you know, we get to see them as these dynamic characters, even though they are not as kind of bombastic as, say, a Vivian character, yes, who is such a bright, fabulous contrast to Evie. I celebrate it, and I'm so glad to see characters like her celebrated through your work. And you actually started to answer one of my questions, because I saw the book is dedicated to your daughter, who you say is like the original Evie. But I was going to say, so Evie's an amalgam of 3 generations of Jenner women, but I'm sure that there must be parts of you in Grace and Vivian as well. And I'd be curious to know kind of what, because I think as an author, your traits kind of inform every character you write, even if it's only a tiny, tiny drop. But you know, because they are such strong voices, where are you in each of those women?
You know, it's really interesting. I like how you say even a tiny, tiny drop, because I think one of the things that you can't, if you haven't had the fortune in life that we've had to be able to really keep going with our writing, which obviously takes diligence and perseverance, but a lot of it is luck. And when you experience writing lots of books and you create dozens of characters, whether they're main, secondary, or cameo, you know, third string, what happens is that looking back, you can see that there really is a little bit of you in every character, but it could be the smallest little thing. It could be a quirk or a habit or whatever. So I would say that because in every book I write, there's about 24 characters. So there's always like 8 or 9 kind of main characters. And then there's like another dozen kind of circling around them. And so between my first 2 books, there's probably like 40 characters. And I would say now that I look back on them, I can see a little bit of myself in almost all of the ones that are good. I don't want to analyze the ones that are not. With Vivian and Grace as my 2 heroines next to Evie, I would say that with Vivian, I have her impatience and her ambition and her confidence. And I would say that with Grace, I was a career coach for decades to lawyers, and you have to learn to be a really good listener. And I think that I've developed just a really strong ability to be very present for the other person in the moment, be very mindful of them and their needs and listen to them, and the patience that goes along with that. And also her kind of enterprising. My friends, my girlfriends have always said that I'm like a very resourceful person. And I think that's in there too.
And you mentioned the 40 characters in the book, which it's so funny, because when I saw because you have a very helpful like little glossary of the characters, or list of characters in the beginning of the book, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is going to be, I'm going to have to refer to this all the time. And I can tell you, I maybe one time in like the first 50 pages, just as I was like getting acclimated, but even though there's such a huge cast, they're all so distinct that I did not have to even refer to that list. Like, and one of the things that was such a treat for me were the real literary characters that were also included. I told you, like, Daphne Du Maurier, now Rebecca's one of my favorite novels. The fact I haven't read her other work is criminal. So she is just like priority number one for me on my reading to-do list. And I'm so curious, what was your process? I'm sure as somebody who writes historic fiction, you know, you get a lot of questions like, what's your research process? But here, not only are you researching a specific time period, but also real people that are incorporated in the story to make sure that their personalities are conveyed in these situations that you're creating from scratch. And like, how did you go about doing all of that?
So I'd love to be more intelligent than I am, but the reality is that a lot of this was sort of serendipity. And I am one of those people that when something happens, I pay attention to it as a possible quirk of fate, and I will kind of go with it a bit. So I actually probably would say the first two characters to come to mind were Peggy Guggenheim and Samuel Beckett, because of a Netflix documentary that I watched 6 months before I started to actually think about writing this book, in which
it's fun, just because I love documentaries.
Yeah, no, it's actually, I can't remember, it's like I saw my PVR still, like The Art of Something, and it's the life of Peggy Guggenheim. And in it, they were talking about how she and Samuel Beckett had this torrid, raging affair in the late 1930s, where they had stayed at the Ritz in Paris and didn't leave the hotel room for like 4 or 5 days, and only opened the door once for a tray of sandwiches. And that just like is, for me, I knew in that moment who those two people were. Like I could just imagine, like, you know, so that was in my brain when I was about to start the book. But then something else really funny happened, which leads to Daphne Du Maurier. And if you research Daphne Du Maurier, you very quickly find out that she was in love with, and a very dear friend, and we think had love for, Ellen Doubleday. Nelson Doubleday Jr. of the Doubleday Publishing House in America, his wife. And by the time my book starts, he's widow. So that's how she shows up. Sonia Blair, George Orwell's widow, another widow in the story, literally surprises me when she shows up. When she stands up and reminds Du Maurier of a short story that she had written years ago that never got published. And she just stands up and says, "The doll." And Daphne Du Maurier's like, "How do you know about that?" And like she puts her hand on her, like I still get a little tingle every time I think of that moment, because I didn't know that this character was going to show up. But with Daphne Du Maurier, what happened was, so I wanted to treat myself to something at the beginning of the pandemic, because I have this book coming out about Jane Austen. So I bought from a rare bookstore another inspiration for my bookstore and Bloomsbury Books and Maps and Bloomsbury Girls. It's called The Second Shelf, and at the time it was in Covent Garden, and I bought an old edition of Mansfield Park from the 40s with an introduction by Daphne Du Maurier. And unfortunately there was a mix-up with the post, and I got sent a care package for someone that was in quarantine from COVID, and in the care package was Daphne Du Maurier's own memoir that she wrote called Myself When Young, The Shaping of a Writer. And so I just read it, and then I get Daphne Du Maurier on my brain. And there's like what happens, and Margarita, I mean, I think people are always perhaps a little intrigued about writers, is like how much of like real life, like, you know, ends up in our books, and like how do we, you know, get our ideas. And it's, for me, it's kind of really random and chaotic. I think it is for most writers. With the historical fiction career that I have, things sometimes just happen really randomly, and my job is to make it work for the reader, and to make it believable, and to make it fun and entertaining. And how I start doesn't matter, it's where I end. So for me, it was really fun to have like this very kind of ragtag group of people that, you know, maybe cross paths a little bit in real life, but hadn't maybe necessarily met each other. And what was interesting, the last thing to tell you about the research of the book, is there is one scene in the book that actually happened in real life. And what's interesting is there was an early reader of my book, Bloomsbury Girls, who belongs to a book club in England, in Cornwall, I think, maybe not, but somewhere on the West. And she asked me, she goes, we are a huge Daphne Du Maurier reading club. Like, we love Daphne Du Maurier, and I'm enjoying your book. And I was wondering if the scene where Vivian meets her is from real life. And it is. And I found in my research that there was a young writer, an aspiring writer, who got invited somehow to a party being held by Ellen Doubleday, and meets Daphne Du Maurier, doesn't know who she is, and has spent an entire night with her. And to the point where Daphne Du Maurier actually not only took her under her wing, but did travel with her and her daughter to the parsonage of the Brontes up in Yorkshire, and things like that. And that was this, I didn't know I was going to do it that way. I didn't know for sure Vivian, when my book, was going to be a writer. But when I figured out that Vivian was secretly scribbling away in her book at work when she was bored or had time, because she's stuck behind the cash counter because they don't let her out. She's like just always behind, like just bringing things through. So she's like got time to kill, and she's writing. And when I realized that she was secretly an aspiring writer, nobody else knew that. And then one day I have Ellen Doubleday show up. And when Ellen Doubleday shows up, I go, oh, there, that's it. And then I knew what the next 2 chapters were going to look like. And that's how I write.
And one thing I want to say, and then I have one more question before we open it up to everybody, is I find it interesting that with this kind of misdelivered care package, you say, oh, it's so chaotic and random. Whereas the way that my mind works is that there is obviously a very good reason that Daphne Du Maurier memoir had to cross your path. And I see it as kind of very kind of specific, intentional workings that we can't understand. But
which is why our books look the way they do. Because that to me right now just sums up your writer energy, right? Because your books are this incredible blend of different ways of telling a story. And we have like a very tiny overlap, which might be, I don't know, feminism, or, you know, sort of like social issues around fame, like our Venn diagram. Like, we love each other, but our Venn diagram is like kind of narrow. But like, I find, and the minute you said that, I just went, well, that's the star that she writes under, right?
Yes. But I see that in your journey too, that all of these things that you see as random, I see as so kind of intentional in the way they inform, like however you interpret it, you know, it still kind of ended up taking you down the same road. And speaking of feminism, there's a quote that really kind of struck me. There were a few, and it also involves Du Maurier. The quote is, the book would have surely been labeled a mere romance if authored by Daphne Du Maurier or any other woman. They're talking about, I don't remember which novel it is. It's written by a man, and you know, it's hailed as this, you know,
Town Like Alice. It's a wonderful book. Yeah.
And but that concept of, you know, kind of when a man writes something that's very similar in theme or tone to something that a woman writes, the different response to it, I feel, unfortunately, like it affected me so much, because I feel like 70 plus years later, that still rings true. And I was curious, sort of, I think that's the beauty of historical fiction, that we not only get a glimpse into a specific time and place of yesteryear, but we also see what the issues are of the day that we can still relate to, that are, for better or for worse, still relevant today. And I'm curious, you know, what was your kind of intentionality behind, like or the things that you kind of stumbled across as you were writing, that you felt, wow, this is still so pertinent today, and it's still gonna, you know, sadly or not, like really be resonant with readers because they can relate to it.
Interestingly enough, I think it started for me, the concept of genre being maybe a bit of a barrier for writers, and especially women writers, was with the Jane Austen Society. And so going back was when I was doing accidental or unintentional research for the Jane Austen Society. I didn't know I was going to write a book. I was just enjoying reading about Jane Austen's life because I was enjoying her books so much. And I was rereading them all. And I noticed that there was as much male fandom or more, because males still dominated academia, for example, and reviews review journals, literary gazettes. And so it wasn't really until maybe the past 40 or 50 years, maybe with the rise of the dime store novel and like a Georgette Heyer or whatever, and then the TV adaptations, that you start to get a sense culturally that she's being a bit ghettoized as a writer of pretty petticoat stories, you know? And I remember when I was reading about all this, being really fascinated at the number of men who loved Jane Austen historically, and then today as well, the fans that she has who were often lawyers. A lot of male lawyers over time, Supreme Court justices, were loving Jane Austen and starting fan clubs. And I thought this was fascinating. So when I was writing this book, I knew from that experience that even though I had reclaimed in my own way from my story as many male fans in my book, 4 men in the Jane Austen Society, and there's 4 women, even though I had done that, with this book, I was thinking about what is it like to be the author? And what is it like to be kind of feeling contained a bit by the norms and the rules around you that you didn't set. And, you know, the one thing I would say again is I think we create best when we're free. And I think that when what you do is labeled, it's good for marketing, and it's necessary for an industry in which thousands of books get released a week. And as a former bookstore owner, I'll tell you, like, they need to be distinguished from each other. And so I totally understand the business side. But I think our job as authors is to temporarily suspend the business concern while we're in the creative act. You can fix that part at the end. You know, that's everyone else's job, right? But while you're writing, it's to just write whatever will serve your story and not feel constrained. So when I write historical fiction, I am really writing about my characters, and where and when they live is not the primary concern for me. And somebody recently said, it's like you're writing fiction in a historical setting. And so when I write, I try not to get bogged down by the historical aspects, only in so much as they serve the story. And I'm really writing to follow my characters that I've set in motion and see how I'm going to bring them all together. And I would love for every author to be able to feel that way. And if you are a genre author in the sense that you love the thing that you're doing, that's wonderful. But for me, I love not knowing what I'm going to do when I sit down to hit the page. And I love writing in the present and in the past. And you know, I'm a better writer if I feel that there's no labels. And I was thinking about Daphne Du Maurier and other writers of that time period, and what it was like for them to start out young in the first half of the century and have this arc of, oh, you know, I've got, you know, Sir Arthur Quilling Couch is mentoring me, and I'm writing these books that are on the New York Times bestseller list, and everything's great. And then as time goes on, the movies get made, and the romance of the movies comes in with Laurence Olivier and the movie Rebecca and all that. As that, you know, as that part comes in, seeing them sort of feeling like they're no longer generating like the respect of their peers. And I thought Daphne Du Maurier, kind of her lifespan of the beginning of the 1900s through to the 70s and 80s, I think that I felt like she was a really good, you know, template arc for examining that. And this is not a big part of the book. It's done. It's a small sort of, you know, side thing. But it really, when I was writing her, Margarita, all I can say is I could feel her anger about it. I could just feel it.
Definitely. I mean, but again, like, I think it resonates today that there is sort of a different standard, and, you know, something that a woman writes that would be labeled as women's fiction. If a man writes a very similar story, it's literary fiction that's reviewed by the New York Times. And, you know, and I've seen really talented authors like Jodi Picoult talk about that for years and years. And now I've also experienced it firsthand. And for me, I'm still at a point where I am just grateful all the time for any readers, but certainly the more diverse my readership is, the happier I am, just because it shows that, okay, like, my story is not just for a very specific narrow readership. And I also just love when people read widely. So
yeah, as a former bookshop owner, I mean, I just want everyone to read whatever they feel like reading, and don't put labels on yourself of, oh, I should read that, because reading should be it should be educative to a point. But as I get older, I'm much more comfortable not finishing books, for example, because it really should be something that energizes you, right? And it shouldn't be draining you. And you can't really discover sometimes what that is unless you read widely and try lots of different things. And I do think like a lot of people that I know will sometimes say, I only read this, or only read nonfiction, or only read that. And I've always just read indiscriminately. And I think part of that comes from having access when I was young, like Jane Austen did, to books in the house, and no one ever said, yeah, it's not right for, you're too young or whatever. And I again, this kind of goes back to, I'm up in Canada, but we hear a little bit about these book banning conversations that are taking place, right? And it's really sad for me as just a person who benefited from like the stuff I got my hands on when I was young. All of it made me who I am. Yes. I don't regret getting exposed to any of it. And I'm so grateful that I ran rampant through my parents' library.
So I think now I still have more questions, but I want to give everybody else a chance to ask. So Karen, do we have any other questions for Natalie?
As of right now, nobody has posted any questions, so please feel free if you have more questions you want to ask her.
You have one or two more, Margarita, for me?
Yes,
I do. I'm trying. I have like, there's so much I want to know, but I would love to know kind of your next project, where you are with it, what you could tell us about it. Side note, will Mimi ever get her own book or be featured again? Because I love Mimi Harrison so much. I really hope to see her again. That's just me as a fan. But more broadly, yes, tell us what are you working on? What's next for you?
So it was a really exciting weekend for me, because after I got the first few weeks of promo done, and oh, Margarita, the month you have ahead of you. it's so fun. It's so fun, but it does make it difficult to have a regular schedule, which for me, I can write anytime, but I really like writing when I first wake up and having a certain block of time. So on the weekend, I finished the last 2 chapters of the first draft of my next book. So it's being sort of sold on spec, and it would come out sometime in 2024. And it follows Vivian from Bloomsbury Girls. 5 years later, in the mid-50s, she's had a couple plays not do so well, and she gets an opportunity through Peggy Guggenheim to work at Cinecittà, the Italian movie studio outside of Rome. And she's going to be involved with some movie co-productions that are being done by a group of Italians, expatriate Americans, expatriate Brits. And the McCarthy Witch Hunt is on. So there's a lot of like ex-soldiers and other people in America in the media industry who are kind of like in Rome, and there's cameos from some famous actresses of the time, which was fun. And I tried very hard for just like, they just show up, like it's very organic. I didn't know for sure who was going to show up. And all I'll say about Mimi, as this takes place in the world of film. So
can I ask, is it before Fellini? Do we get to see
Yes,
Fellini?
It's before Fellini. He gets a little shout out.
Okay.
Okay, but
that's fine.
It's about 3 or 4 years before he starts to get really famous. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, not really famous, but
I actually found myself just dying to know what happens to all the women, but especially Vivian, of course, like as a fellow writer, like what happens to her career. So it makes me so happy to know that we're going to find out. That's fantastic. And then also I would love to know, writers or readers. So I'd love to know some books that you've read that you've loved recently, and also what's on your summer reading list.
So, well, of course, I loved your book. I also loved In the Face of the Sun by Danny S. Bryce, who's another one of our debut author pals. And every spring I go on this huge Truman Capote kick. I don't know what it is. So I've done Breakfast at Tiffany's, and right now I'm reading Other Voices, Other Rooms. I am rereading Jane Austen again. It's time. And my summer reading list is actually a lot of Hollywood-esque memoirs. Partly, I mean, people that, I'm doing a course, like listening to audiobooks on the history of Italian cinema, but there's also some amazing memoirs out, Sophia Loren and other people in the Italian film industry. And I'll be spending the summer, because what happens for me with my books is I can't read fiction while I write because I'm very porous. So I haven't been reading as much lately. Fiction wise, I've been reading a lot of nonfiction. And once the arc of the story is down and the plot is down and the characters are in place, then I do more research. And I'm not sure if other historical fiction writers are like this, but I then kind of go crazy. Like I've done an initial deep dive, and then this summer I will be really immersing myself in Tales of Hollywood to find any other nuggets and things to build atmosphere and theme, etc. Because I've just done a first draft. I've got 6 months easily ahead of me still. So I think the summer is going to be a lot of Hollywood memoirs.
Interesting.
Yeah. What about you? What have you read lately that you love? Besides my book, I'm joking.
Oh, but seriously, that I've been raving about it to, anybody who will listen. But there are some really great debut. I love supporting debut novelists as much as possible. And there's one coming out at the end of the month called The Bartender's Cure by Wesley Stratton. Especially if you loved books like Sweet Bitter, which I adored, this is set in the world of New York bartending, and it's a coming of age tale, but also a history of it's chock full of cocktail lore, and there's so much, and it's beautifully written. So I love that book. And then I guess I have a soft spot for coming of age novels. There's another novel by June Gervais that I believe it's also coming out later this month. I'm going to be doing an in conversation with June. It's called Jobs for Girls with Artistic Flair, and it is set in the world in 1980s Long Island, New York, with a young woman who wants to become a tattoo artist, and that is during a period of time where it is a very, very male-dominated career to have. So it's her kind of struggles as she tries to kind of pursue this area. And also just, it shows, I love books that show you a world. I mean, I don't know anything about the world of tattooing, and of course I love the 80s, so immediately that side of the premise drew me to it. But just to kind of learn about this whole other craft, again, whether it's bartending, whether it's tattooing, I think is fantastic. And as far as my reading list goes, I do have The Doll and Other Stories by Daphne Du Maurier. I've been doing a lot of audiobooks. I get to read through so many or listen to so many more books than I do reading. Just for some reason, my attention really kind of latches onto audiobooks. I can do 5 audiobooks in a month versus like 2 fiction, and I'm a very slow reader, unfortunately. But I am in the middle of The Likeness by Tana French, which I know, Where Have I Been? I loved In the Woods. But the second one, it's supposed to be just kind of one of her best. And it's one of those books I read before bed, and I shouldn't, because it keeps me up way, way, way too late. I can barely see and I can't stop reading. So I'm loving that. And other than that, I do love reading thrillers during the summer months in particular. So they're definitely going to be checking out a lot of, hopefully discovering some new thriller writers too.
Cool. Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we don't have any questions, but I have a question I'd like to ask. You've brought it up a few times that you are one of many who have debuted at the beginning of the pandemic as an author. So after that debut, what has it been like as an author writing during these pandemic years? Have you found it different compared to when you were writing prior? Have you found it affecting your writing a little bit?
I haven't found it affecting my writing. I do think that just generally it's been a stressful time because my husband is at highest risk for severe COVID. So it's been more an escape for me, actually, in a really wonderful way. And my habits haven't changed around it. Like I still approach the craft the same way. I think that, to be absolutely honest, being a writer during the pandemic was probably the best twist of fate for me, because I was able to write 2 more books during this time, and they gave me so much joy. So I'm very fortunate to be able to have a job that I could do at home. And I think, like Margarita said, when you first get published, you're so grateful to get published and to have that good fortune on your side after both of us years and, you know, rejections and on a grand scale. And I think that I felt just very lucky that I could do something I love at home, and I did it. And I was very lucky that even though I was also quite sad and worried for my husband, it was this great escape for me. Margarita, what about for you?
I agree with you that also it provided a place, like a happy place that I could create for myself. I was very, very lucky. I got to do a book tour of 3 cities. And I remember, just because I wasn't used to I've never did a book tour. I know it was just a few places, but you know, I was a little tired after.
A tour is a tour.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just, you know, traveling that much just in the space of a few days. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, I am not going to leave the house for like a week. And I kid you not, lockdown started a few days later. Yeah. So that was the last time that I have seen some of my friends in years, since 2020. And now I'm going to be kind of going back to those same cities next month. Yeah. And it's going to be the first time I've seen them since COVID. So for me, it was just it was such an exciting time. And then this unexpected, kind of frightening, like confusing period of time. And what struck me was that people responded to Una in a way like that it was an escape for them, and they found the book just, you know, so uplifting, and it was something that kind of could make them forget about what was happening. And I used to, or still kind of think of myself as writing kind of more darker and twisted things. And so for me to write something that was like heartwarming and uplifting was kind of unintentional. And but because during that period of time, I was seeking out stories, movies, shows, podcasts that were more comforting, knowing that I wrote something that served that purpose. I wanted to do that again, but you know, still with my kind of darker, more twisted sensibilities. So like, I didn't even realize in the UK, uplit it's a genre, uplifting fiction, uplifting literature. So, and again, and one of the things I love when people talk about Acts of Violet is that, well, it's not really this or this or this or this genre. It's kind of a mashup of all these other genres. Like, I always flirt with different genres. Yeah. And, but I was just thinking like, oh my God, what do I need right now? What do we all, I feel like we all need like some more magic. And so I'm going to be as literal as possible and write a book about a famous magician.
I swear, I was like, we're all missing bookshops. We can't go in bookshops. I'll write a book about a bookshop. It was that literal. So that was, the pandemic had a big effect on both our next books, didn't it?
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. That's so funny.
Well, thank you so much, Natalie and Margarita, for being our wonderful question asker and all this wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Margarita.
Great.
Oh, thank you, Natalie. And thank you, everybody who joined us. I hope you run out and get Natalie's books, both of them. And this was such a joy, and I can't wait for us to do it again for your 3rd book.
So it has been so great to have you with us. Thank you to everybody who attended, and I hope that you all enjoyed this presentation. Thank you, of course, to our authors. Thank you for sharing your time with us. It's been wonderful. For our attendees, if your ticket tonight came with a signed book, it will be mailed out, or it's available for pickup in the coming days. Please reach out to Anderson's Bookshop if you have any additional questions about that timeline. And thank you again. Be safe and happy reading, everybody. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.